Good morning, everybody. Good morning, colleagues, on this quite rainy and cold morning in Johannesburg. My name is Nwabisa Makunga. I am the editor of Sowetan, and I want to welcome you today to this event. We've really been looking forward to it, the Gautrain Management Agency Rail Dialogue in partnership with Sowetan. I want to call up my panelists, yes, they're here. So if they can please just walk up on stage in the meantime while I do some quick introductions, and then we will get straight into our program. Please do join me on stage, ladies and gentlemen. Please give them a round of applause. I'll introduce them shortly.
When you know that success is yours to have. When love and affection calls you to reconnect. When you're eager to start a new day with the courage to make yourself a priority. When it's time to explore and broaden your horizons. If you live, work or play in Gauteng, the Gautrain commends your ambition, determination and that passion for life and the environment. Gautrain, for people on the move.
We have Mr. Tsepo Khobe, who is the CEO designate of the Gautrain Management Agency. And I just want to say, sir, today, first of all, I'm a big Springbok fan, right? And I think what the Gautrain is doing today is absolutely a boss move. The fact that today, as we welcome our champions, you can literally hop onto a Gautrain and go to our time between this morning and 3 o'clock, I think it is. Thank you very much for that, and looking forward to having this conversation. On my other right or left, we have Mr. Bonginkosi Mabaso, who is the Chief Commercial Officer of Transnet Freight Rail. Really looking forward to having a conversation about the work that they're doing in that organization. We then have Mr. Ofense Madisha, who is the transport economist and head of public policy at Uber South Africa. So thank you very much for joining us. Looking forward to having the conversation with you. And last but definitely not least, we have Ms. Kate Sechia. She literally had to practice the surname Sechia, who is the executive officer at the Rail Chamber. Thank you very much for joining us. We just want to play a quick video, but before we do that, I want to remind everybody that we are live. For those who are streaming us online, thank you very much for joining us. You're more than welcome to interact in this conversation. Send us all your questions, your comments, and very much be part of the conversation. If I may ask our team to play a quick video, and then we'll get straight onto the conversation. Thank you.
When you know that success is yours to have. When love and affection calls you to reconnect. When you're eager to start a new day with the courage to make yourself a priority. When it's time to explore and broaden your horizons. If you live, work or play in Gauteng, the Gautrain commends your ambition, determination and that passion for life and the environment. Gautrain, for people on the move.
Round of applause. So today we're talking rail. We do say there we are zooming in on rail, its importance, its contribution to our economy, skills development, and essentially opportunities that exist not only for us as individuals, but as far as the mobility economy of this country. And first, perhaps, I just want to pose a question to the Gautrain, to Mr. Khobe. Congratulations. You're literally about to take on a very important job as far as the mobility of this province. So congratulations first on that. Let's talk about the necessity of particularly the Gautrain, but also mobility, smart mobility, efficient mobility, particularly in urban spaces such as Gauteng.
So, thank you for that, and thank you for hosting us, Nwabisa. I think let's look at the facts, and in the last probably 7 days, I've been going around trying to explain why do we need to extend the Gautrain. But we need to understand the facts first. We did modeling, traffic modeling for the whole of the province. And the traffic modeling assumes that all freeways, including the ones that have not been built now, will be built. And therefore, at that point in time, you would have Gauteng Freeway Improvement 1, which is what we have now, Gauteng Freeway Improvement 2, and then Gauteng Freeway Improvement 3 built in place. Every time we've run that model and we excluded the freeways that were not there, it would always actually bomb out to say that you do not have enough capacity to carry the number of vehicles. So in 2025, which is 2 years from now, the province, the entire province and its freeways, the speed on that will grind down to 25 kilometers an hour. Now, in 2037, you have to understand why that is important. From 2013 to 2037 is 25 years, which is our Integrated Transport Masterplan in the province, runs until 2037. So we had to test the end date of the plan that we have now. In that year, the freeway speed will grind down to 10 kilometers an hour. Now, if you've ever been in that region between Brakfontein and Batlu interchange, if there's ever an accident on the freeway, you know what 10 kilometers an hour looks like. I actually run faster than that. So that would mean it would be faster for me to run to work than actually drive there. And I have experienced what it looks like to travel 7 Ks. So I literally live 7 Ks away from my office, to travel 7 Ks in an hour. So it takes you an hour to go from this end of Midrand to that end across the freeway and all of that. Now, that's our reality that we're going towards. Now, in 2013, when we realized that, one of the key decisions that we made was that rail will become the backbone of what they call of public transport and transport as a whole, in order they call it, in the whole of the province. Now, in 2013, another thing happened. The UITP was held, and the UITP is the International Union of what they call it, of transport providers. Now, the UITP decided in that year that their strategy would become what's called PT times 2. That public transport, its intent in the next 10 years from 2013, which is this year is actually supposed to be the year in which public transport becomes double its size. We are nowhere near that. And PT times 2, but PT times 2 in itself became a problem because in 2050, the entire world's population, 70% of that would live in urban cities. Now, those facts alone are telling you we're heading for a catastrophe. And therefore, we have to find a better solution. You're not going to build your way out of it. Gauteng has the smallest landmass. A lot of areas where we're supposed to build freeways, we've already built on them. Unless we double the freeways and start building on top of the ones that we have, you do not have any other solution. And that would be more expensive than doing any other thing. Now, with those facts, I wanted to be able to bring on the context of why we need to have this conversation. Now, in addition to that, in 2050, we would need to move 3 times the amount of freight that we move today. And including its last mile, because people tend to think of freight on the long hauls, bringing it from Durban to what they call it. The distributing from City Deep to local depots and then ultimately to your house or to a market near you. People never think of that. We would need to move 3 times after that. Something happens in the middle of these what do they call it, timelines. COVID occurs. After COVID has occurred, it accelerates the need for mobility, especially on the freight side. Because suddenly, a lot of our purchases move online. And now suddenly there's 60/60, ASAP, Dash, and all of that. And what comes with that? And maybe you might not have noticed, but you have experienced it. All these accidents with motorbikes everywhere. And every day you find another 60/60 bike on its side. Because we had not planned for this. We don't even have the legislation for it. Now, we need to think differently, and we need to shift our paradigm about how we think about all of this. And I just wanted to set context.
Sure. You talk about thinking differently. So I live somewhere in Johannesburg, and I do a school drop 5 Ks from my house. It takes me most of my morning to do that, just simply because of of congestion. So I think that part of the need is absolutely not in dispute. However, South Africans, for some reason that one may not understand, are very much into my own space, my own car. I want my own, rather than using, to the full extent, public transport and efficient public transport. How do we do that mind shift as people and actually recognizing assuming we have an efficient public transport, recognizing the opportunities that may exist there for our own mobility and efficient mobility at that?
So what's important, and as I've now being introduced to everybody, and I've been having meetings with bankers, with investors, and all sorts of other things, I speak about what I call mobility as a lifestyle. And you start talking about mobility as a lifestyle, and we as Gautrain have built our new strategy, which has just been approved by the board, on that theme. And when we're talking about that, and I like the fact that you raised the school run. So every time I speak to a young mother and ask her, why don't you use the Gautrain? She says, the school run is in the opposite direction. And by the time, as you said, by the time the morning ends, the freeway has cleared, and I can just drop onto the freeway and go to work. But I then ask, why couldn't the school be at the station? Okay? Mm-hmm. While you're at it, why couldn't you be able to pick up lunch from the station? But why do you need to even leave the station? Why couldn't you have your meetings there in the station and have facilities to do so? And then on the return journey, why couldn't you pick up dinner? No, pick up the child first, pick up dinner. And then if the child has, the sniffles, like it is cold today, why couldn't you pick up medicine from one of the pharmacies, they call it? But you have an interview tomorrow, why couldn't you pick up the shoes that you need in the station? And that's just the minimum of what we're talking about. The possibilities are endless. You might have seen we've started introducing driver's license and testing centers in our stations. And this morning we were having a meeting with the MEC, and she's talking about spreading them across the entire network. Now, that's what we call retail plus amenities. And if you can get your driver's license in our station, why can't you get your passport there? Yeah. Why can't you renew your motor vehicle registration in the same space? And why can't you get any other government service in a station? And in essence, that's the direction that the Gautrain is going towards. And even its extensions will be built on that basis. We're even going to the level where we're talking with the Department of Health and building health facilities in our stations. And so the ability for us to be able to move South Africans, we're not going to move South Africans on the basis of, I'll give you transport, come here, it goes faster. No, you got to bring the need. And the need is that, and I know young mothers always worry about one thing. I've got a small child. If I use the Gautrain, the commute from the station to the crash, it's going to take forever, and I'm going to end up paying fines because I picked up the child late and all sorts of other things. But if the first place where you get off the train will be where you pick up your child, I'm making people's life easier, as what they call it. As ourselves as a system, we're doing exactly that. And to us, we have to build mobility into a lifestyle, rather than it being a utility. The only time you worry about it, it's when it's not there. But let me not monopolize the conversation.
Mr. Mabaso, he speaks about freight rail, right? Big part of this conversation, just kind of taking it broader. How would you perhaps characterize the state of that industry at the moment? Lots and lots of challenges. I sometimes turn on my TV and I see you talking about vandalism. I turn on the radio and I hear you talking about, capacity as far as locomotives are concerned. Should we have anything to worry about? What is the state of freight rail in South Africa at the moment?
Thank you, Nawisa, and a good morning to everyone. And just before I get to that, a big round of applause for the Gautrain for pulling this very important conversation together for us. It's these types of conversations that move the economy forward, and we really applaud you for that. We have been in the news for all the wrong reasons, and it doesn't help that some of us have been subjected to this level of scrutiny. But that said, it's not all lost. If there's one thing I think that we all are aligned on, it's the fact that our rail solutions in the country can never fail, because rail is the backbone of the economy. You mentioned just now that freight rail requirements are going to triple in the next couple of years. That alone speaks volumes, and that only scratches the surface insofar as the requirements of freight rail, insofar as it correlates or links with consumption. There's another layer to it, which is much worse than that. South Africa sits with some of the world's reserves in terms of mining that are nowhere else. In manganese, for example, South Africa, and this is not a very known fact, South Africa sits with 80% of the world's known manganese. Chrome, South Africa sits with 80% of chrome in the entire world. So as the world gradually grows out of these reserves, all eyes are turning into South Africa. And at that time, we need to be ready to move these commodities for exports, but also for consumption in the country. That said, whatever challenges we are currently faced with as a rail service provider in the country have to be resolved. At the top of these challenges, you've mentioned two, vandalism and cable theft. We continue to be subjected to this. And much as for a Bonkosi sitting somewhere minding their business, a cable that is stolen for 500 meters may not mean a lot. If you look at the bigger scheme of things, in the previous financial year alone, we lost 1,100 kilometers of cable in our network. That is, just to contextualize that is a drive down to Durban and back of cable stolen. It's gotten better. The previous year, we had 1,600 kilometers. I got in trouble the other day with our head of security. In an interview, I was asked the very same question, and I said, we lost 1,600,000 meters of cable. He comes back and he says, no, you're making us look bad. Say it in kilometers. It sounds better.
It's bad.
It really is bad. Yeah. It really is bad. So much as that's the case, we are not folding our arms and sitting back. There's a lot that we've done to, as I've said already, we've seen a 33% reduction in cable stolen. The unfortunate part is, as we advance our technologies and solutions in resolving this issue, the syndicates, because we've established it's syndicates that are doing these things, are equally ramping up their capabilities. We are not talking about an individual person that goes with a steel saw to cut 1 meter of cable. We are talking about sophisticated syndicates that would go in there with the sole intention of stealing meters and meters of cable. There's a market for that. And that's where we are focusing now to sort of clamp down. Of course, with partnerships with law enforcement, there's a lot of work that's being done. On the issue of locomotives, it also then becomes the second biggest challenge that we sit with. Without maybe sharing too much detail, you'll be aware that the railways, and I'm sure my colleagues will attest to this, in railways you plan for at the very least 10 years ahead in terms of your fleet. Some 10 years ago, we went into the market and purchased 1,064 locomotives. We went on an open market, it landed in China. We were supplied with these locomotives. During the engagements around state capture, it was established that there were some irregularities in the transaction, and the transaction was suspended. Along with that, the supplier of the locomotives then withheld spare parts. If you drive a Mercedes-Benz, a BMW, you can only drive it for so much years without service, without parts. Ultimately, we are finding ourselves parking our locomotives over time. To this day, the last I checked, we were sitting with some 600 odd locomotives that are parked. These are billion rands worth of assets that we can't use because we don't have access to parts.
The ripple impact, I imagine, on
the ripple
clients,
impact is just insane. If you look at particularly the mining sector is the hardest hit. Again, we are not sitting back and watching this. We've gone in and renegotiated these terms, gotten it right. We now have a situation where between some organs of state in China. There needs to be some solutions that need to be finalized before we can bring this back. But ultimately, not all is lost. There's a lot of work that's going in to solve these two issues in terms of security and locomotives. And we continue to support the economy with the resources that we currently have at our disposal as Transnet.
Kate, I want to come to you. Bongosi speaks about, and I want to pick two things in particular, the length of time, for example, that it takes as far as planning is concerned, but also how the world is shifting to look at us for essentially the commodities that we need to export. And I'm sitting, somewhere in Johannesburg, and I'm a young person, and I'm really wanting to get into the sector. I don't know how. Do we have the right skills, particularly for young people who are wanting to get in, or young people who are already in the sector but wanting to promote themselves? Do we have the right skills? What is the skills development program looking like at the moment?
Thank you, Nobisa. Thank you very much. As Transport Education Training Authority, we are responsible to ensure that we develop skills in the transport sector, particularly for the sake of this meeting in the railway space. Yes, we are required as TITA to research the skills in the railway industry or railway environment to ensure that the learners or the upcoming generation who are interested in the rail space, they have qualifications, they have training institutions where they can go and train and become professionals in the railway space. We develop a document, a guide document that we call the Sector Skills Plan. It is the SSP. It is the research that we as the Transport Education Training Authority develop together with industry, because there is nothing that we can do without the railway industry. They have to come and tell us what are the skills that are required at Transnet, what are the skills that are required at GMA, what are the skills required Uber, Gibela, and whatnot. And together with them, with the Department of Higher Education, we are able to come together. We develop what we call the Sector Skills Plan, and the Sector Skills Plan, from it we derive a list that we call the SPOI list, which is the Sector Priority Occupational Intervention List. That list, it is also informed by what we call the workplace skills plans, the WSPs and ATRs that the railway industry submits every year on the 30th of April. They submit those two reports to inform the sector skills plan, which is a guide towards what skills are there in the railway sector, what skills are required, which new positions have evolved, and how do we get them registered? Because indeed, it is very difficult for young people to access this space of the railway industry, because it is male dominated and very technical in nature. And also, when you look at the SDPs, which are the skills development providers in the railway space, they are not really there. So it is the training space in this industry, it is not very much accessible, but as TITA, we are in the, it is our mandate to ensure that we have qualifications, that we have training providers that are accredited, we inform learners that are at the TVET colleges, universities, to know more about this space, because you will also realize I have this a career guide booklet, which is also informed by industry. TITA cannot develop this alone because we cannot develop something that cannot be used by industry. Industry themselves have to develop this guide to ensure that the learners have information in
Kate,
terms of what they should do.
I don't mean to disturb you. I just want to ask, there's something interesting that you said. We talk about access, right? So I think we've established there is a kind of a very strong correlation between training and the needs, or training curriculum, for example, and the needs that do exist in the industry. But you mentioned access, and the South African story of access cannot be spoken about without financial access, for example, to do this. Are you finding that there is a concerted effort to assist young people in particular with the financial means to be able to enter that space?
Thank you, Nabisa. Actually, it is our responsibility and mandate to ensure that we give grants to our companies, to our railway companies, to ensure that they train these learners, to ensure that they give them spaces for internships, to ensure that they give them spaces to do workplace approvals. So, as a SETA, the railway companies or the transport sector companies, in this case, I'm looking at the railways, they are required to submit the workplace skills plan. On submission of the workplace skills plan, they are then granted 20% back of the monies that they will have paid as levies. Remember, they are required to pay levies, which is every company is supposed to pay over 500,000 of their annual turnover to TITA. Actually, they pay it to SARS, and then SARS takes the levy files to the Department of Higher Education, and then from the Department of Higher Education, the department allocates the funds to TITA, who then, when companies in the railway space submit their WSP, ATRs, which is the workplace skills plans, and the annual training reports, then we evaluate the information that they have submitted and these criteria that the grant regulation stipulates that when they submit, they must meet 1, 2, 3, 4. Then they will then get their 20%. Let's say a particular company, let's say GMA pays 100,000 as their levies for the year. It means they will get back 20 rands, which is 20% of the 100 rands. So another way in which we fund training in the railway space is through discretionary grants. We advertise them, like on Sunday, we have advertised on the 29th of October, we have advertised until the 27th of July for all the companies in the transport sector to apply, including the railways, even the SMMEs, any legitimate company. Yes.
I'm going to check and ensure that companies in particular have actually taken you up on that. If I may, I just want to move to Offense. Of all that we are talking about, Offense, ultimately, it is pinned on what kind of policy we have. that helps us reach, kind of the goals that we are wanting to do. And part of that is a conversation about infrastructure, so just transport infrastructure in South Africa as a whole. Is it really geared, if we agree that mobility is really at the center of our economy, the transport infrastructure that we have, is it geared towards the kind of future that we are wanting to have?
Very interesting question, and thank you for framing it that way. Maybe to start off, we need to zoom out a bit. When we look at the base principles for our infrastructure development, at least in the country, we're actually living off a derived demand. There's a derived demand for segregated settlements, whether it's from the Group Areas Act or the Native Areas Act. That's historical base. That informed the modus operandi for our existing railway infrastructure in the form of PRASA. Yeah. Then, along those lines, we also saw the growth of the bus sector and also the growth of the internal combustion engine. Now, if you look at the way in which the fuel levies were structured at the time, they were in many ways almost a financier of the type of roadway infrastructure that we have today. So what happened then was that we started to see this spatial change taking place, on one hand incentivized by the availability of internal combustion engines, on the other hand, the way in which the money was moving to our road agencies would then proliferate the kind of roadway development that we see. Then what happens? We have Akashia, Wonderboom, we have all these settlements sort of emerging between the townships and the CBDs, and that starts to build up a new type of traffic environment, at least in the South African market. And that's how the base question from Dr. Kobe sort of starts to emerge. So that's where it really starts, from an infrastructure perspective. On one hand, we had access to railways, and then on the other hand, we had the growth of private vehicles and internal combustion engines, which then blew up and spread us across the whole of the country and fragmented us quite significantly. As much as we've tried to respond to this, whether it's through spatial planning, what we're seeing is that there is a need for a different type of intervention. That's where investments such as the Gautrain, investments such as bus rapid transit systems and so on, all of them were trying to really address the spatial configuration of our cities, right, at an infrastructure level. And then they overlay that with the right business models. It's overlaid with the land use change that you need to incentivize development, to attract households, to attract activity. Therefore, you sort of create something called density articulation, where now you're almost enhancing the viability of the use of that public asset, especially where you're using mass transportation, not individual transportation. So I'll pause there to allow you for.
If I may, I just want to go back to you, Mr. Kobe, and just to, I mean, you spoke briefly earlier about the expansions, right? And of course, there's been a lot of conversation. Is it really what is that we are needing? And I think you've laid quite well the context. Where are you expanding to, and in particular, why those areas of Gauteng?
So, first and foremost is that let's add context to what Offense has raised now. Railways, by their nature, because of what they were built for, they were always built away from the cities, with only one final point in the city. Now, in essence, what it did is that then when development occurred, it alienated the railway line. In actual fact, the railway line actually is a boundary in most townships, in most cities. It's the badlands are always across the railway lines, and that's why you always have the term across the railway line. You know, these are people from across the railway line. Now, that in itself is an important context, because if you look at the market today, one of the Gautrain successes and what do they call it, a success enabler, is the fact that I will drop you off in Sandton. I will not drop you off somewhere else so that you can get to Sandton. Now, it's an important context in the sense that if you go into more mature European cities, you will find that their railway lines actually do exactly that. Now, by its nature, you need to then redevelop the railway line to bring people to where they want to go to. So as we expand the network, we now recognize that there are areas that are first unserviced. So the northwestern side of the province has no rail at all, not even Prasa, which is that four-ways Lansaria area towards the Dainfen area. That area, there has no, in actual fact, at times there's not even any public transport at all. The taxis just fill the nation, but they've just generate more traffic more than anything else. So we're going into that space. And in addition to that, we're going now to the additional townships. So we're going to Sowetan, we're going to Mamelodi, and we're also going towards the Boksburg side, towards the Springs area, past the midfield terminal at the airport. So as they build the midfield terminal at the airport, which will now become the new international portion of, what do they call it, of the airport, the Gautrain will come into that area and then extend down towards Boksburg and the Springs area. That in itself is the immediate network. We have what we call the Gauteng Super Network. And the Gauteng Super Network, and it's not all Gautrain or Gautrain type services. So the Gauteng Super Network, what it does is when we start talking about mobility that empowers an economy, what it does is interconnects the special economic zones. Now, the special economic zones, why do we need to interconnect the special economic zones to the urban core? It's because one of the decisions that we took in 2013 after we decided that rail was going to become the backbone of public transport in Gauteng is we decided that we are not going to build outside of the urban core. And we will preserve our green spaces. And when we don't build outside of the urban core, you have to enable both labor and knowledge workers to live in the urban core, which, as we agreed with Ofensa raising it, also in 2013, we decided to densify the urban core. So we moved from where I think it was, what do they call it, 30 dwellings per square kilometer to where we're now looking at 90 dwellings per square kilometer. Now, that in itself, it's a big issue. It's when you have that many people, there is no other way of moving them. If you want to be able to see a nightmare unfolding, go and live in Midrand. We have these 3-floor walk-ups. They tell you 70,000 or 7,000 units or 700 units advertised in this particular. And I think about it and I said, 700 units with 2 individuals that own cars there. That's 1,400 cars leaving that one estate at the same time. Now, that's a nightmare of note, and it's unfolding right in front of us. Now, you have to think differently about the entire thing and saying, well, can we actually be able to, as we densify the urban core, be able to move people from the urban core into the special economic zones where the economic activity is going to be, and then back again? But we talk about something else. We talk about the 42 minutes province, which means you should never, ever from the edge of the province be 42 minutes away from the airport. And that in itself is a game changer. And the need for us to be able to look at a greater super network is much more important than us even focusing on this small expansion that we're doing now. We're going from where we're going to, from, the 80 kilometers to another 150 kilometers. And then ultimately, we're thinking it will get up to 580 kilometers of railway line. Not all of it is going to be heavy rail. Some of those parts of the network will be trams or light rail systems. Some of it will be pure BRTs. Some of it will be, what do they call it, will be on other modes of transport. And then, who knows, we might even incorporate a high-speed rail network traversing the whole network as a whole.
I know you always get asked this question, and I'll ask it here again. There's always obviously that criticism about Gautrain and accessibility, in particular to the broader South African community, which may not necessarily afford, certain prices as far as mobility is concerned. Looking at the expansion, please can you talk us through that, with that context of such criticism?
So it's not a criticism. I think it's what they call it. It's one maybe a lack of understanding and what do they call it, and not being informed in the sense that we got to talk about the transport mix as a whole. Just because the rest of the network does not function, that does not mean everything must be burdened on one type of system. A transport mix has to have a stack of anybody who wants to go faster, allow them to be able to pay the price they want to pay because that's their choice. Speed and time is what they hold dear, and they are willing to pay for that to do exactly that. Then there's the next tiers of transport that allows you in rail to do an all stops, Every 5 kilometers you're stopping and you have no ability to ramp up and ramp down your vehicles that much. And that the type of metro service that is there. And it has its own pricing. You've got the high-speed networks that will allow you to be an hour, 15 minutes from there, what do they call it, from neighboring provinces into the airport type thing. That has a certain cost to it. Now, that in itself also has to be able to say, transport in itself, it's what we call a negative concession, if I were to get a bit technical about that issue. A negative concession means if you decide to make it a social service, and it's not based on the user pay principle, then you have to subsidize it. Whereas if you use the pure user pay principle, then there is a particular price that gets paid. And if that price is too high and politically the decision gets made that it must now be made into a social service, you then need to fund it in. And fund it in from the fiscus. Now, in certain services, their ratio of how much money they make, for every 100 rands they spend, they only make 10 rands. We, at the current moment, actually, the operations of the system can wash its own face. And that in itself does not even include, in those services, does not include the capex they have to spend to keep the entire service afloat. The amount of money we get covers our capex, covers our opex, covers our renewals. And if you were to compare that money to anything else that everybody else gets, we're relatively cheap as a whole. But let's get back to the question you actually asked me originally. The pricing. The pricing is an important issue. And you must also understand, as a metric, the amount of money you make as compared to the amount of maintenance you need to do, the amount of what do they call it, cleaning and keep up of the system, they correlate. And you have to make sure that you're making enough money to can sustain your operations. And then from then onwards, when you lower the price, that money has to come from somewhere. And in essence, we have to think about it clearly. We are not against lowering the prices. We are just simply, and when we did our feasibility study, Treasury did ask the question. And we did the study, and the study showed that we can actually be able to attract double the amount of what they call of riders, or even 3 times in certain lines. And we looked at specifically the Sowetan line initially because that's phase 1 of what they call it, of the extensions. And that in itself, it hiked the price up on the one end by 50% on the subsidy side. And that was submitted to Treasury to say, you need 50% more subsidy to be able to allow that to happen. And we had various permutations. One was getting rid of the boarding fee completely and only charging the per kilometer rate. The second one was having the boarding fee and having the, what do they call it, the per kilometer rate. And each one of those, and we have about 8 options of what needs to be done. I am still awaiting the Treasury to cut the check, and then we will then enable the lowering of the prices.
Bongos, I can imagine you're also waiting for Treasury to do a few things, but with the absence of that currently, you obviously need a lot of investment, just as far as your lines, are concerned, in particular if you look at the volumes that you need to push out. In the absence of any kind of miracle that may happen, perhaps in the public kind of investment space, collaborations as far as private institutions, is that a conversation that is happening? Are you considering those? What may those look like if you are?
No, thanks. We most certainly are. We most certainly are. The issue that you raise around pricing is not. We are not absolved to it as well. We have a dual mandate as a state-owned entity, and it's one to enable the economy through pricing that enables economic activity in the areas where we operate. But the second one is to be a commercial institution that is able to wash its face. But as it is now, over time, the two mandates seem to overlap in one or some state, to the extent that in our analysis, we have found that some of the flows that we operate over time have started regressing in terms of their capabilities of recovering cost. To that extent, to maintain infrastructure without a commercially viable business operation becomes a bit of a tall ask. Similarly, and this is one of the things that we are out there about as a rail operator, we are not able to tap into markets for funding. And therefore, we are saying private sector needs to come to the party at that level in terms of the enablement of infrastructure. But there is a sub level that also requires, intervention or maybe partnerships with the private sector. And that's the issue of dealing with the challenges that we are faced with. We have partnered in many of our corridors with the industry in fighting crime. Crime is not a Transnet responsibility.
Yeah.
It's not a mandate of ours to fight crime. Our mandate is to move freight on rail. But we've found ourselves shifting some of our resources from investment in infrastructure into fighting crime. The types of technologies that we have in our systems now. And just again, for purposes of context, we own a rail network of 22,000 kilometers. We're one of the biggest rail networks in the world as Transnet. There's no ways that you're going to have a security guard at every kilometer times 22,000. It's 22,000 kilometers of network. It's 29,000 of rail kilometers of network. It's absolutely impossible. So we found that with partnering with the industry, private sector, they would come in with some technology, some expertise. That's one of the enablers that have enabled us to reduce number of incidents and cables stolen in our line quite significantly. But the bigger picture of private sector participation is embedded in the rail policy that is currently being looked into and being implemented. And that is the separation of network ownership and rail operations. What that will do is it will enable rail operators to come into the network from the private space to contribute in ensuring that we have a Class A network in terms of rail in our system through investment, but also to ensure that the cost of service is lowered across the board. But generally, we have private sector participation in 3 tiers, and we continue to engage and champion involvement of private sector in solving some of the problems that we sit with.
Thank you for that. I know I have probably abused power by giving our panel a lot of time to engage, but I really do feel that, the insights they have to share are very, very important, and that's really why we came to this conversation. We've got a few minutes, 15 minutes so to go, and I want to open up the floor to questions. There are already questions coming through from our digital platform, and I'll go to some of them now, but if there are any, I'll take perhaps 2 questions in the room, and then I'll be very strict with my panelists and just literally giving them about 30 seconds to 45 seconds for them to be able to answer the questions as comprehensively as possible. Any questions? I'm not sure if there's a roving mic. Yes, there is. Any questions in the room so far? There is one front here.
Good day. Just one question to Ms. Kate. I heard you mentioned the involvement of TITA when it comes to FET colleges and as well as universities. Are we not a bit late to introduce those skills at that level? Because for one, I made my decision to say I want to do logistics when I was still in high school. So by that time, I already knew what I was going to study. Do you have any programs that then goes to schools before we even get to make those decisions at that level? Thank you.
Thank you, Me. Yes, we do a lot of career exhibitions. We do have partnerships with the public sector, with the private sector as well, where we do joint ventures and invite schools and invite even universities and even invite employees in the transport sector, employees in the railway sector as well. They participate because with companies that are not sustainable and retrenching people, employees as well need to reskill. So we adopt schools, for instance, and we support those schools from grade 10 up until grade 12, and we encourage them to actually take up to actually take up transport-related careers. Like you say, when we were growing up, we didn't even know I didn't know what is a train driver. I didn't know what is logistics. I didn't know what is road freight, So we do a lot of that together with our stakeholders. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is there another question? Front here, yes.
Good morning. Gautrain Smith from Gauteng Province Department of Roads and Transport Design Services. My question is directed to Mr. Tsepo Khobe. You mentioned that you might scale Gautrain to Soweto in other regions in the east, like Springs and so forth. What happens when a Gautrain is not subsidized and people from such regions can't afford it? Won't it be a wasteful expenditure in the long term if you extend it to those regions that are previously disadvantaged? For example, in the east, Kempton Park, Tembisa, there's there's Arieng or like a Rea Vaya. They installed elevators, but now nothing is working there. All the cables have been stolen. So won't it be the same if you extend Gautrain to Soweto and Springs, but then people can't afford it and it's not subsidized? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead, sir.
Good, I what do they call it? Sometimes I ponder about these things, and about 2 weeks back, I went to Soweto for our annual youth summit. You need to go to Soweto in the morning. Soweto is a parking lot. Between 6 o'clock in the morning until probably just after 8:30. It's a parking lot. I mean, literally that. It's miles and miles of what do they call it, of cars. The level of car ownership in Soweto is unbelievable. Our service was always, and I'm giving you this analogy because our service was always designed to be cheaper than car use, and the holistic amount that you pay for you to own your car, including your monthly repayments of the car, putting petrol in it, insuring it, tires and services and all of that. But it was always meant to be slightly higher than general public transport so that we don't start a taxi war or go into, what do they call it, into a fight. Now, if we are cheaper than car use, so when we did the study for, what do they call it, for the Soweto line, it takes 80 minutes for you to go from Soweto, from the furthest reaches of Soweto, into Sandton. We can get you there in 20 minutes. Are you still going to sit in your car for 80 minutes? So do you still believe it's going to be a white elephant? But I'm just saying, I'm just, so because there is a need. And by the nature of PPPs, we never ever expand into an area where there's no demand. And that's what I like about Regulation 16, because Regulation 16 is very specific. You don't build stuff from emotion. You build it because the demand is clearly there. And we are almost 5 years too late at the current moment because the study was done in 2017. And I wasn't expecting, in actual fact, driving in on one of the what do they call it, on the traffic circles on Sowetan Highway, we couldn't pass. It just became, it's a traffic circle, it's supposed to function like a traffic circle, but you've got cars parked along the traffic circle. Lucky for me, I grew up in a location, I knew how to hustle in and around that sort of a thing. Hopefully there were no cameras and, but what do they call it? I'm just saying to you, the demand is there. And it has become exponential now. And Sowetan line, we're building it first because that is the line that actually showed the highest demand as compared to the rest of the lines.
I'll take just two quick questions. There's a question online from Stan Mulema. Hi, Stan. And the question is, has the Gautrain, I think you did touch on this a little bit, but maybe to expand, has the Gautrain considered integration of the main network with light rail as feeder system, or as a feeder system?
Yes, it's a big part of our strategy long-term wise as a company. So for instance, the line, the Hatfield line, there is a consideration that the entire thing get decoupled from the main line, and we run a tram train on that line, and then we run it in a circular motion in the whole of Pretoria. The Lanseria line in itself can easily be built and decoupled from the four-ways main line, and we run a tram train on that in a circular motion on that line too. There are lines we're looking at down in order they call it in the Vaal that allows you to be able to access the Vaal River City, the Vaal Airport, the Aerotropolis. And that line in itself does not necessarily need to be, what do they call it, to be fully a heavy rail line. So there is a set of lines that actually can be done like that.
Okay. Just another question to Offense, and it's really about technology. How does technology improve transportation systems, and in particular partnerships, perhaps with rail companies?
Okay, so quick one. The shift from road to rail applies everywhere. So it applies for passengers and it applies for freight. But even when you are trying to access that shift, the kind of operational investment and partnership models that you need will require some degree of operational management and marketplace management in particular, especially when you start splitting operations from infrastructure. The moment that starts happening, you're going to need a variety of different types of technology systems. So for passenger transport, you'll need layers of mobility as a service tech stacks that sometimes even integrate with land use and property developers and maybe even tourism platforms. Then in the freight context, the moment you start sort of dabbling into unlocking this kind of landscape, you'll then be looking at platforms like your line speed, your highlights, where basically you're starting to link the last mile, the truck operator, horse owner, and driver into one bundle with the railway operators who'd probably be Transnet plus others, into one activity, into one process, a single way bill, and a full coverage in terms of Incoterms. All of that require a very aggressive tech stack that again, at least in the South African market, I think there's opportunity for. Then there's also the layer for education, the skills that we need to develop that technology, to manage it, to integrate it across different transportation modes, services. Those are skills that we're going to need. So basically, technology as of yesterday, is really a big part, but I think going forward, it's going to be a much larger part across the board to achieve this.
Thank you. We have roughly about 5 minutes to go, and I really want to ask just perhaps a minute each for our panelists. And I'll start with you, Bonkosi, and perhaps it's really, if you were to summarize what it is that South Africa should understand about the need to keep, to secure and keep our rail infrastructure, and secure it, particularly from the onslaught, I think that it is facing, what would you say we probably need to do?
Navisa, on Saturday, I thought a minute was very long at the Rugby World Cup, but all of a sudden it feels very short
sorry.
at this moment. But if I were to bring it home, particularly in Gauteng, and again, bring a bit of context to it, how we are structured as Transnet Freight Rail is we run a corridor that we call Central in Gauteng, which is a hub for our entire movement of the network across the country. Last week I was in Durban and in a meeting, and we stand in the balcony with the customer and we look at the vessels on anchorage at the sea. And he says to me, look at the number of vessels sitting there. Do you realize that Black Friday is actually sitting there at the sea?
Sure.
There was a moment that really just crystallized it for me to say, the TV that will ultimately sit in someone's wall in their lounge has to move from the sea via rail into Gauteng, into Midrand. What we have not done right over the years, and it's what Pratsepo touched on earlier, which was railways were designed to have a specific touch point in the city. And we forgot to account for the movement of product, then of cargo, from the touch point into the end users. Our refined strategy as TFR is we are repositioning facilities, sidings that we have. In the past, the use of sidings was allocated on an individual basis, but now we look at sidings as common user facilities that will enable movement even within the city. Where we have a siding, we need to enable as much movement in that space as possible. Bring the cargo closer to the users so that you shorten the last mile that will ultimately be on road. You cannot do away with road haulage of cargo, but bring it as close as possible to the individuals. But overall, generally, we move as Transnet. We've got rail capacity of moving 240 millions of cargo. And then you can imagine, Gauteng being the backbone of manufacturing, the manufacturing industry, they are heavily reliant on cargo that moves from Durban via the container corridor into the city. Without that, you are shutting down quite a number of industries that exist. So it is imperative that we keep railways alive, and that's the purpose of our turnaround strategy that we are implementing as an entity.
Absolutely. I'm going to ask Kate and Offense the same question, and if we can make it as quick as possible. I am 25 years old. I'm not 25. I'm talking hypothetically. I am 25 years old. I really want an opportunity in this industry, be it an educational opportunity, be it an opportunity, a working opportunity. Where do I go? And I'll start with you, Kate. What perhaps are the one or two things that you would advise me to actually go and seek information that will empower me to make such a decision?
Thank you so much. I will advise that as a young person, you can go to our website. We have a career portal. You can register there and upload your documents and everything and your desires. And then we will come back to you and let you know. Check for bursaries every year. June, July, we advertise bursaries. We give out 400 or just over 400 bursaries every year for transport related or even in the rail space, by the way, careers. And you can go as well to our various platforms and check for information, look for the sector skills plans, and check out what emerging skills are there, especially after the pandemic, the 4 IRs and whatnot. Look for this book as well. We always give it out to young people, even to employees in the transport sector, the railway space as well. So you can call us as well. You can just go to the website, get our email addresses, and yeah, you will
We'll
get
try and
hold
put
of
the
us. Thank
website
you.
on our platform as well, just for people to be able to get that information on Sowetan Live. Offense?
So there are different points of entry in terms of for young people. I remember when lecturing, I would always say that the first point of entry is at your local taxi association. where you could potentially assist them with books, assist them with coordinating some of the activities that happen there. And a lot of people would be worried and concerned whether that's a legitimate job or not, but it is. But then when you take it a step further, in modern day, you'll find platforms like your Harambee Youth Employment Initiative, where you can just upload your documents, as Mama explained, and they'll match find you with the right kind of employer based on what you're looking for. And then you can also delve into more platform type work, where you look at whether it's your 60s or Eats or other kinds of online services where you do get access to a vehicle. Some of them actually, you go through a TITA training program that helps you to build your business, set it up, and then plug into the platform. So my view, though, is that for young people today, business, self-employment in the early stage is really going to be important. Some are going to find the consultant track where if they go into their postgraduate, they will be able to participate and be interns in a consultancy environment. But by and large, the world today really needs young people who be creative and innovative from a job creation and small business creation perspective.
Mr. Khobe, the last thing I think I want to ask you is, of all of this that we've just spoken about, perhaps what stands out for me is an issue of governance. In Gautrain, you guys have had, numerous clean audits, and that really speaks to a culture, I think, of good governance. So congratulations on that. But please just briefly speak to us just about the importance of that, as far as institutions like yourselves being able to reach the goals and transform the society that we live in the way that we want to.
Thank you, Nabisa. And for me, governance is not governance for the sake of governance. And governance by its nature actually contributes to the bottom line of the business. Now, we did so as part of the feasibility study, we had to test our feasibility, whether it's fundable out in the, what do they call it, in the global world. And we brought one of the rating agencies to come and rate the feasibility study itself and ultimately rate our agency. And the only reason why we couldn't get a better rating is because it's not allowed for you to get a better rating than your sovereign rating. But they did say that we're actually better than the sovereign rating. That's an important issue because fundability of your project always depends on whether you've got the right jockeys or not. The people who run the business and the governance of the business matters to investors. Modern day investors do not just throw their money at anything. They give their money to places where, one, it will be spent, and then secondly, there would be very little or no wasteful expenditure, and they will not be embroiled in what they call it, in scandals about where they had invested their money. And it is a part of our business for us to ensure that we remain with that level of governance, because the ability for us to get funding out into the open market will always depend on that. And it's an important issue. It's about the bottom line.
Fundability of the business or the project depends on whether or not you have the best jockeys for this project. To my panelists, thank you very much. I want to say thank you to our partner, Gautrain Management Authority, for making this possible for us. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I've learned a lot from this conversation, and I really hope that it was useful and insightful for all of you. Thank you for joining us. To all those who are on the virtual platform, please do look out for some content on Sowetan Live as far as this conversation is concerned, and do remember to engage with us and really let us know and give us some feedback on some of the questions that you would like perhaps us to address in future conversations such as these. Thank you again to all my panelists. Thank you for all your hard work. Igama lami ngunwabisa Makunga, and thank you very much. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
When you know that success is yours to have. When love and affection calls you to reconnect. When you're eager to start a new day with the courage to make yourself a priority. When it's time to explore and broaden your horizons. If you live, work, or play in Gauteng, the Gautrain commends your ambition, determination, and that passion for life and the environment. Gautrain, for people on the move.